Have you ever felt like there's a darker part of yourself you're afraid to face? What if that shadow isn't just inside you, but rising within all of humanity? Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century, believed that this shadow, the unconscious part of our personality, was not only very real, but growing stronger in our world today. What does this mean for us? And why should we care? Jung's concept of the shadow is central to understanding human nature and the crises facing society now. The shadow is everything we deny about ourselves. Our fears, our rage, our desires, and the ugly truths we refuse to acknowledge. It is not evil in a simple sense, but a part of our psyche that, if ignored or repressed, can become destructive. Jung warned that the shadow is not just an individual phenomenon, but also collective, manifesting in groups, nations, and even entire cultures. Imagine the shadow as a dark storm cloud gathering on the horizon. The more we refuse to confront it, the more it grows in power and intensity. This shadow, Jung said, is rising within humanity, threatening to overwhelm us if left unchecked. Why is this happening now? What is fueling this growing darkness? To understand, we have to look back at how Jung described a shadow. He said that every person carries a shadow, formed by the parts of ourselves we reject, traits that society or our own upbringing has told us are unacceptable. We push these traits into the unconscious. But the problem is, what we don't see can control us. The shadow lurks in the background, influencing our actions, sometimes causing us to project our fears and hatred onto others. When entire groups repress their collective shadow, it can erupt into violence, prejudice, and conflict. History is full of examples. Wars fueled by fear and hatred, genocides justified by denying the humanity of others, social divisions hardened by demonizing the enemy. Jung saw the rise of totalitarianism and mass movements in the 20th century as collective shadows coming to the surface. Today, we are witnessing a similar phenomenon, but on an unprecedented scale. Political polarization, social unrest, racial and cultural tensions, ecological destruction. All these crises are symptoms of the shadow rising. The shadow thrives in fear, ignorance, and denial. It feeds off division and secrecy. The more polarized and fragmented society becomes, the more power the shadow gains. But here's the crucial insight from Jung. The shadow is not just a threat. It is also an opportunity. When we face the shadow, integrate it into consciousness, and take responsibility for it, we grow stronger and more whole. This process is called shadow work. It involves courageously exploring our unconscious fears and biases, understanding the dark parts of ourselves, and transforming them. Why is shadow work so hard? Because it means facing what we've long avoided, the parts of ourselves we dislike or find shameful. It's easier to blame others or pretend the shadow doesn't exist. But Jung believed that ignoring the shadow leads to greater suffering. The shadow demands to be acknowledged. It calls for honesty, humility, and self-awareness. The collective shadow is even more challenging. It asks societies to confront historical wrongs, systemic injustices, and uncomfortable truths about power and privilege. It demands that we stop projecting blame onto others and instead recognize that the shadow lives within all of us, no matter our nationality, race, or ideology. This is why Jung's warning is so urgent today. The shadow is rising, and if we fail to face it, the consequences could be catastrophic. But if we choose to acknowledge and integrate our shadows, individually and collectively, we could transform the darkness into a source of wisdom and healing. Think about it. What happens when societies refuse to acknowledge their shadow? When injustices are denied or swept under the rug? When fear and hatred fester in silence? The shadow grows unchecked, manifesting in violence, oppression, and environmental destruction. Jung's insights suggest that the crises we face now are symptoms of a deeper spiritual and psychological imbalance. Yet there's hope. The rise of movements calling for social justice, environmental stewardship, and mental health awareness can be seen as signs of society waking up to the shadow. People are beginning to confront uncomfortable truths, challenge old systems, and demand change. This awakening is part of the shadow's integration. So, how can we begin to face this rising shadow? The first step is awareness. We must recognize that the shadow exists not only inside ourselves, but in the collective. We must stop denying the uncomfortable truths about our society and ourselves. This means listening to voices we have ignored, examining our biases, and confronting painful histories. Next comes the work of integration. This is not about eradicating the shadow. That's impossible, but about bringing it into the light of consciousness. When we see the shadow clearly, we take away its power to control us unconsciously. We learn to use its energy creatively, turning fear into courage, hatred into understanding, and division into connection. On a personal level, shadow work can be transformative. It helps us become more authentic, compassionate, and resilient. We learn to accept ourselves fully, including our flaws and contradictions. This self-acceptance is the foundation for healing and growth. On a societal level, facing the collective shadow requires dialogue, reconciliation, and justice. It calls for acknowledging past and present wrongs and working to repair harm. This is not easy. It demands courage and commitment from leaders and citizens alike. But it is essential if we want a more peaceful and equitable world. Jung's warning is clear. The shadow is rising, and it will continue to grow until it is faced. The choice before humanity is stark. Deny the shadow and risk chaos and destruction, or confront it and unlock the possibility of healing and transformation. Now, consider your own life. What shadows are you ignoring? What parts of yourself have you pushed into darkness out of fear or shame? How might facing these parts change your relationship with yourself and others? And on a broader scale, how can we, as a global community, come together to acknowledge and integrate our collective shadow? What steps can we take to heal divisions, address injustices, and restore balance with the natural world? These questions are not easy, but they are essential. Carl Jung's warning is not a prediction of doom, but a call to awareness and action. The shadow is rising, but so is the potential for humanity to grow wiser, kinder, and more whole. If this idea resonates with you, I invite you to reflect deeply and share your thoughts. What does the shadow mean to you? Have you encountered your own shadow? What challenges or insights came from that experience? How do you see the shadow rising in the world around you? Join the conversation below. Your voice matters in this critical dialogue about the future of humanity. Together, we can face the shadow, not as enemies, but as whole, imperfect beings seeking light in the darkness. As we dive deeper into Jung's warning, it's important to understand how the shadow operates on both personal and collective levels. Individually, the shadow is made up of traits and impulses we reject, but collectively, it's an enormous, complex force shaping the fate of nations and cultures. How exactly does this collective shadow express itself in today's world? One of the most visible ways the shadow emerges is through the rise of extremism and radicalism. When people feel powerless, alienated, or afraid, the shadow fills that vacuum with anger and hatred. This can lead to polarization, where groups become entrenched in opposing beliefs, unable to see the humanity in the other side. Social media and digital echo chambers amplify this effect, making it easier than ever to demonize and dehumanize those who think differently. Jung believed that when the shadow is repressed too long, it doesn't disappear, it explodes. Look at the growing political unrest around the globe. Violent protests, nationalist movements, social fragmentation. These are symptoms of a collective shadow that has been buried beneath the surface, now breaking through in dangerous ways. But the shadow is not just about politics. It also shows up in our treatment of the environment. The ongoing ecological crisis reveals a collective blindness to the consequences of our actions. The shadow here takes the form of denial, greed, and disconnection from nature. We exploit the planet without fully facing the damage we cause. The shadow refuses to be ignored. It pushes back with wildfires, floods, droughts, and species extinction. On a cultural level, the shadow can manifest as racism, xenophobia, and systemic oppression. When societies refuse to confront histories of colonization, slavery, and discrimination, these wounds fester beneath the surface. The shadow thrives in silence and denial. It grows stronger with each injustice ignored and each story untold. Yet, despite all this darkness, Jung also saw the shadow as a gateway to growth. He called it the dark source of creativity and transformation. When we engage with the shadow instead of fleeing from it, we tap into deeper truths about ourselves and the world. This is the paradox of the shadow. It contains both destruction and potential. How do we harness this potential? Jung recommended a process of active imagination, a conscious dialogue with the shadow. This means sitting with uncomfortable feelings, exploring dreams, and paying attention to the parts of ourselves that scare or shame us. By naming these aspects and bringing them into awareness, we weaken their unconscious control. For societies, this process requires courage on a grand scale. It demands truth-telling, reconciliation, and systemic change. It asks us to build bridges between divided groups and to acknowledge the pain that has been buried for generations. One powerful example of collective shadow work is the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions established in countries like South Africa after apartheid. These efforts created spaces for voices long silenced, allowing a nation to confront its dark past openly. While not perfect, such initiatives show how facing the shadow can lead to healing. Another key to integrating the shadow is empathy. When we start seeing the humanity in those we fear or dislike, the shadow loses its power to divide. Empathy breaks down barriers and opens the door to understanding and cooperation. But empathy alone is not enough. It must be paired with accountability. Shadow work requires owning our role in perpetuating harm, whether through action or inaction. This means confronting our biases, privileges, and complicity in systems of oppression. In the age of information, we have unprecedented access to knowledge and perspectives from all over the world. This is a powerful tool for shadow work if used wisely. Education, open dialogue, and cultural exchange can help us dismantle illusions and face uncomfortable truths. Yet, many resist this process because the shadow is painful. It challenges our identity and comfort zones. It forces us to question beliefs we have held for years, even our sense of morality. This resistance is natural but dangerous if it leads to denial. Jung warned that denial of the shadow fuels what he called the inflation of the ego. When people refuse to acknowledge their darker sides, their conscious identity becomes exaggerated, rigid, and brittle. This ego inflation can lead to destructive behaviors, both personally and socially. Consider leaders or movements that portray themselves as purely good or righteous, refusing any criticism or self-reflection. Such attitudes often mask deep shadow dynamics, which can erupt in arrogance, aggression, and violence. In contrast, true strength comes from humility and integration. Admitting our shadow doesn't weaken us. It makes us more whole and capable of genuine connection. It opens the door to healing wounds, repairing relationships, and creating more compassionate communities. This brings us to a vital question. How can we cultivate shadow awareness in everyday life? The answer lies in mindfulness and self-reflection. Practices like meditation, journaling, and therapy can help us tune into unconscious patterns and bring them into the light. Facing the shadow requires patience and persistence. It's not a one-time event, but an ongoing journey. Each time we recognize a shadow trait, question a bias, or challenge a defensive reaction, we take a step toward greater wholeness. Imagine a world where more people engaged in this inner work. What might that look like? A society where empathy, honesty, and accountability shape our actions. A culture that embraces complexity rather than simplistically dividing people into good and bad. In such a world, the shadow would still exist, but it would no longer control us. Instead, it would become a source of insight, creativity, and resilience. Jung's vision was not about eradicating the shadow, but transforming it, turning darkness into light. But this transformation cannot happen without collective effort. It requires leadership committed to truth and reconciliation, communities willing to engage in difficult conversations, and individuals brave enough to look inward honestly. We all have a role to play. Whether through personal shadow work or collective activism, we contribute to the rising tide of consciousness or the deepening shadows. The choice is ours. So what can you do right now? Start by asking yourself, what parts of myself have I been afraid to face? How might they be influencing my actions and relationships? What biases or assumptions am I holding that keep me from seeing others clearly? Then consider your community and society. Where do you see the shadow rising? How might you contribute to healing divisions and fostering understanding? This is the challenge and the promise of Jung's warning. The shadow is rising, but so is the possibility of transformation. The future depends on whether we choose to confront the darkness or deny it. I want to hear from you. What does the shadow mean in your life or your community? Have you experienced moments when facing the shadow led to growth or healing? How do you think humanity can collectively navigate this rising darkness? Leave your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can learn from each other and support the journey of shadow integration. Remember, the shadow is not our enemy. It's a part of who we are. By embracing it, we open the door to greater truth, connection, and healing. As we reach the conclusion of this exploration into Carl Jung's warning, it's important to reflect on the deeper meaning of the shadow rising and what it demands from us. The shadow is a mirror, showing us the parts of ourselves and society we often refuse to see. But this mirror is also a doorway, leading to self-awareness, healing, and ultimately, transformation. Jung believed that ignoring the shadow leads to what he called psychic inflation, where the ego grows disconnected from reality, blinded by denial and arrogance. This is a dangerous place for individuals and societies alike. When the ego inflates, it inflames conflicts, distorts truth, and sows division. The shadow, in this state, becomes a force of destruction. However, Jung's message is not one of despair, but of hope. The rising shadow is a call to consciousness. It is an invitation to awaken, to become aware of our unconscious fears, prejudices, and impulses, and to take responsibility for them. This awakening is the beginning of true freedom. Freedom, in Jungian terms, is not just about external circumstances. It is a liberation from the unconscious forces that manipulate us without our knowledge. When we bring the shadow into the light, we reclaim that power and choose how to act consciously rather than react blindly. Imagine what this could mean for humanity. A collective awakening that softens divisions, heals old wounds, and fosters empathy across cultures and ideologies. A society where truth is sought not to justify hatred, but to build understanding. A world where power is wielded with humility and justice. The challenges we face today, from climate change to social unrest, can be seen as symptoms of a collective shadow demanding to be faced. The question is whether we will rise to the challenge or fall into further denial. Jung's work also reminds us that shadow work is deeply personal. It starts within. No societal change can occur without individuals committing to inner transformation. Each of us must be willing to confront our fears, prejudices, and the darker corners of our psyche. This process is not easy. It requires honesty, patience, and often discomfort. But the rewards are profound. A deeper understanding of ourselves, richer relationships, and a greater capacity for compassion. The shadow also teaches us about balance. It is not about rejecting our darkness or pretending to be perfect. It is about embracing our full humanity, the light and the dark, the strength and the vulnerability. In this balance lies wisdom. By honoring both sides of our nature, we become more whole. We learn to channel the energy of the shadow into creativity, courage, and healing. Throughout history, artists, writers, and spiritual leaders have tapped into the shadow to create profound works and inspire change. This creative energy is a testament to the shadow's potential when integrated. So, what does this mean for you and me? How can we apply Jung's insights in our daily lives? First, start by observing yourself without judgment. Notice when fear, anger, or prejudice arise. Ask yourself, where might this feeling come from? What part of me is trying to be heard? This simple awareness begins the process of integration. Second, seek dialogue with others, especially those who challenge you. Listen deeply and openly. Remember, the shadow thrives in separation and fear. Connection is its antidote. Third, commit to ongoing learning. Explore different perspectives, histories, and cultures. The more we understand, the more we break down the barriers of ignorance that fuel the shadow. Finally, engage in community and collective healing. Support movements and initiatives that promote justice, reconciliation, and environmental stewardship. The shadow cannot be faced alone. It requires collective courage. In the end, Jung's warning to humanity is both a caution and a beacon. The shadow is rising, but so is the chance for transformation. The choice is ours. Will we hide from the darkness and let it consume us? Or will we step into the light of awareness, embracing the full spectrum of our humanity? The answers to these questions will shape the future of our world. I invite you once more to reflect deeply. What shadows are rising in your life and the world around you? How can you contribute to healing and integration? Please share your insights and experiences in the comments. Let's build a community committed to facing the shadow together. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the depths of the human psyche. Remember, the shadow is not to be feared but understood and embraced. Through this embrace, we find the path to wholeness and to a brighter future for all. If you found this video meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might benefit. Together, we can shine a light into the darkness and transform the shadow rising within humanity.